I'm Jeff Corey. I am the executive director at One Roof Community Housing in Duluth, Minnesota. We serve Duluth and surrounding communities, and we go up the North Shore of Minnesota. If you're not from Minnesota, that's about a 110-mile stretch along Lake Superior to the city of Grand Marais. Most of our work is in Duluth and immediately surrounding areas. We do lots of things at One Roof, but our history is that we were a community land trust first. So we were Northern Communities Land Trust until 2012. At that point in time, we merged with Neighborhood Housing Services of Duluth and took on a couple of other lines of business. So at present, we do the community land trust work. We do some multifamily development. We do lending, mostly for home renovations and down payment assistance. We do homebuyer education and counseling. We've got inside that space, we've got a credit builder and repair program that we've designated as a special purpose credit program, working specifically with BIPOC households to try to move the needle on racial homeownership gap. And we also do tenant and landlord education, troubleshooting and mediation. So we do a lot of things. Duluth's about 87,000. We used to be bigger, so we're still trying to grow back into the infrastructure that was the city. It's sort of a Rust Belt history. We were much bigger 50 years ago than we are today in terms of population. And so we have some unique challenges, oldest housing stock in the state kinds of things. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of who we are, what we do. Our tagline is we make home a better place. So all the things we do have to tie back to housing. And we're here to talk about responsibly growing organizational capacity. I just have to say, I've been on the job 25 years, and I think I know some things about how we grew our organization capacity. I think we were mostly responsible. But to be completely honest with you, I'm not an organizational development consultant, and so I'm here to sort of share what I know and things that I hold on to as we do our work. But I do not know all the answers. I do not know your communities or your organizations. And so grain of salt, and as you have things to offer through this conversation this morning, I would just welcome you to do that. And yeah, it would help me if we knew a little bit who's in the room in terms of some things about your organizations and your positions. So just a show of hands, how many folks here are standalone community land trust organizations? So about 2/3 it looks like. That's helpful to know. Of the folks that aren't standalone groups, can just shout outs of how much of your book of work is community land trust versus other things?
We do some internal land trusting and partner with the metro area.
Yeah.
Metro area land trust, so about 40% of our production this year will be in some sort of land trust.
Got it. And the rest is largely single-family habitat production. Great. Others that aren't standalone?
Southwest Minnesota Healthy
Sure.
Partnership. Our land trust is probably about 5% of our work right now, but it's starting to grow.
Right. Thank you.
We're in a community action agency, and I'm probably at about 5% as well.
Okay, great. Any other not standalones?
Carver County's TDA, probably 50% of what I do as the organization, probably in that 5%.
Okay, great. That's just helpful context. I think like one of the bits, this probably doesn't need to be told to any of the non-standalones, but I think it's a good message to sort of just in the movement of land trust work to be contemplating and sharing with colleagues now and again is that we need to be sort of like, if the land trust program is not your standalone thing, you need to be careful and cautious about how you set that up, because I think I have seen examples in the past of community development corporations that started a land trust program and sort of expected that land trust program to sort of pay for itself. And one of those examples was the mothership kept all the developer fees. And I'm like, well, how the hell is that supposed to work? You know, like, so just, you know, it's good to sort of have a sense of who's here and how we're thinking about it. And, you know, if we start a land trust, we need to be thinking about the long term, because that 99-year bit is an awesome responsibility, right? position and job title, who here would say they either are the program director for the land trust work their organization does, or the executive director or CEO for the organization? Good to know. Board members? One board member. For folks that aren't in those spaces, what would you describe?
I'm our operations and finance director.
Okay, great. Molly's finance. Yep. How about you? Consultant, okay. Others?
Manage the rehab of the homes that come in.
Got it. Great. Any? COO? Yeah, that's, yeah, I should have included that one. Yeah, my bad. Any other things, any other positions represented? Okay, thank you. How long has your CLT existed? So 0 to 2 years, show of hands. 2 to 5, show of hands. 5 plus, 5 to 10, show of hands. Anybody over 10? Awesome, okay. Number of CLT homes, 0. Anybody? Okay. 0 to 10. 10 to 50. More than 50? More than 200? Awesome. A number of CLT homes in the pipeline for the next 2 years, 0 to 10. 10 to 50? More than 50? Awesome. So I'm going to buzz through the agenda quick just to give you a sense of what I'm hoping to talk about. At the end of the agenda is the parking lot list, and we'll put some things over here. If you're thinking, I really wanted to get this out of the session and that knucklehead didn't put it on the agenda, well, let's make sure we capture that, because we will finish in time for some discussion, and we can talk about other things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our land trust, just kind of big picture to give you a sense of how we've grown over time and how that happened and what we look like today. I'm going to talk a little bit about strategic planning. More slides on this than maybe I should have had, but we did a strategic plan last year that was an eye-opening experience for me in terms of like how one might do that, and I found it to be useful in ways that previous ones weren't. So I want to spread a little bit of that news around. A bit about business planning, how to think about that for your land trust. Some funding strategies. Tomorrow I'm doing a session on earned income, so that'll dive deeper into some of these categories than I will go today. Staffing strategies, talking about culture, talking about retention, talking about just how to be thinking about the place that we have our workers in, and tell you a few stories of woe. Some of them happened a long time ago, some of them not that long ago. But I think it's important that we don't pretend that it's always pretty when we're doing this work, because it hasn't been my experience that it has been. And then to talk a bit about how to keep maybe some of those things from happening, so how to minimize risk and think about our work. And then parking lot and questions and more discussion. So is there anything that folks were hoping to hear was on the list that's not on the list so far? Phew. Jeff Washburn sort of wrote this description and then said, will you do it? I'm like, that's an interesting way to come up with curriculum, Jeffrey. So, all right, some stats on one roof. So these are from last year. Last year was a pretty typical year for us in a lot of ways. So we helped 26 households, 39 adults and 42 kids. That's a lot of people in those 26 households. We had quite a number of resales last year. We're still battling supply chain issues. Last year, we're mostly through them now on the AC rehab side, and on the new construction side, we were slow in production last year because we've had a challenge working with the city on a program to use vacant infill lots throughout the city. Go figure, many of them weren't actually buildable. So we've had several delays in that space, and we've also bumped into a challenge with challenges with HUD environmental reviews getting done on time. And I think that's a unique to Duluth thing, but maybe not. Anybody else seeing that? Okay, darn. I think we're making some progress on it, but so it can take 60 to 90 days, or it can take 6 months, and then sometimes we send the list and the city staffer doesn't do anything with it for 3 months, and then add that time to whatever it might be. Yeah, what are you seeing?
Well, 60 to 90 days.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been very inconsistent on the staffing level. The other thing that's been slowing us down is our State Historic Preservation Office has been understaffed. And so, yeah, and the city let an agreement with the State Historic Preservation Office lapse. That would have allowed us to sort of not have to wait for them on rehab projects. So that hasn't been a help either. So 46% of the folks that we've helped have been single head of households, 27% households of color. That's really, those stats all sort of bear out like what we've done historically, as is the average income. Duluth is a ridiculously not colorful city. We're about 10% of our population are folks of color. And so to help 27% feels like we're making a difference, but it's also hard to know how to measure such things exactly if you dive real deep into it. Average purchase price of $148,000 last year. Market value of 210. You can see the uptick from 180,000 the previous year. So we're really seeing values jumping, even though interest rates went up. Even this year they're still staying where they were. And then average monthly payment of $1,067. That was up from $818 in 2021. So we're doing our best, but it's a little demoralizing to see those numbers moving upward. Just to give a sense of where the homes on our properties, our land trust homes, 331, but where they came from. So 91 of them were a buyer-initiated program. We haven't operated that program since before the recession. Some groups are still doing that work really successfully. We found that with our old housing stock, we weren't able to do enough work elegantly after closing when the family was living in the home to keep doing that. And so we flipped to doing more just to the AC rehab. We've done 81 new construction homes in our history and 159, should say AC rehab homes. 218 resales and lots of them last year, as you saw in the previous slide. So the geography for the 331 homes, we have most of them, as I said before, are in Duluth proper, 287. We've got 20 in the community of Proctor, which is immediately adjacent to Duluth. We have 2 in Hermantown. Those were probably buyer-initiated homes because it's really tricky to get into that market. It's right next to Duluth again. 7 homes in Cloquet. We've been working with the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, and the city of Cloquet on doing homes there. 5 homes in Two Harbors, 20 miles up the North Shore, and then 10 in Grand Marais. Talk a little bit later. We've got 8 homes in construction in Grand Rapids, which is Itasca County, west and a little north of Duluth, and the Itasca County HRA is doing the development of those homes. They'll come into the land trust, but we're teaming up with them on that. You could get a little bit of a sense of the homes as they've come in over the years, what we were doing when. A lot of buyer initiated early and new construction early, then a major focus on AC rehab, and then lately getting new construction to be back in it again as well. Growth over time. So the top line, of course, is households served. The middle line is the number of homes, and the bottom line is the number of resales that happened annually. So I just think it's a good reminder. It could be, we did it this way, and so that top line is going to keep separating from the other ones because we'll help more and more people as time goes on. So on the strategic planning front, yeah.
Are you gonna talk in some about like the strategy regarding the models? Like I know like you did a lot of like buyer initiated early on, and then
Yeah, I wasn't planning to, but I can do a quick bit here. So that's we'll just take it. I think no, I think it's fine. I think we'll get through with questions. So if I feel like we're starting to get a little tight on time, then I'll push it to the back to make sure we get through things. But initially, we did the buyer-initiated work in large measure because it was something that we could do where we didn't need to have the development expertise. So we could rely a little bit more on a partnership with the housing authority that managed the rehab of the homes. We could rely on an inspector who actually did initially the inspections as a volunteer. He was on our board, and then ultimately we moved him off the board and hired him. But it was expertise we didn't have on our staff, but we could hire. And so that was how the initial sort of flow of homes were coming in. I should just back up so you can even see it.
Yeah.
You can see, so the buyer-initiated ones were a big bunch of the homes in the early years. We started the new construction. Initially, we did a partnership only with the local community college. They had a building construction project, so we'd do about 2 homes a year. And then we added, figured out how to do modular for a while until that dealer stopped doing modular. And so then we pivoted and started building some homes with our own construction company. And we relied in large measure on a partnership with the Corrections Department of Minnesota. And we had a prisoner crew that worked on houses, and it was a way for them to sort of learn some life skills, job skills, and then decrease their sentence. When the recession happened, we pivoted to doing AC rehabs. We were moving away from buyer-initiated anyway, so we did a harder turn. Though the words of one of our board members echoes in my head. He said something to the effect of, "Turning this new construction ship around is trying to get an ocean liner to spin on a dime." And so it's hard to just stop something and start another thing when the thing is something that each house takes 10 months to build or something, right? So, but then we switched to AC rehab and did just that for a number of years, and then we've been working to get new construction back in. A couple of the new construction things that we did were very site specific. There was a project with the city of Duluth where we did, I think it was 10 homes, a mix of market rate, mid-range, and land trust homes. And then we did a project in Grand Marais that was 10 land trust homes. So we've been working to get the infill new construction humming again, like it was in the early days. But I think the AC rehab, because our housing stock is so old, will be something that stays in our book of work. We've really got that dialed in and do it well. And the new construction, in large measure, we're dependent on, can we find general contractors that really know how to do this and want to do this. In our market, there's almost no contractors that do scale construction. I think that's increasingly true in communities. Most of the contractors are doing, like market rate sort of custom home type things. But 20, 25 years ago, when there was lots of scale happening in other parts of the state, we didn't have that here in our communities then. So is that helpful? Okay. So on the strategic planning front, some questions about sort of where does the input come from? The process I talked about us doing last year was much broader and more, dynamic and real time in a way that I had not experienced before, and found that there were some synergies and some dialogue that resulted that really made a difference for us. So I think historically, boards give input to the community land, or to the strategic planning process. The difference in this instance last year was we had, maybe I'll just put all this up and then talk about it a bit. So what we ended up doing was sort of a process where we pulled all folks together in a World Cafe sort of a style. Much of it happened during time in COVID where we weren't doing much physical gathering, so it was actually online. but we were able to sort of have board members, staff, funders, board members who were land trust homeowners, other stakeholders, partners that we'd worked with, all sort of providing input at the same time in small groups and large groups, kind of coming and going. And what we ended up finding was that we would hear things that we might not have heard. And then, you know, it's one thing to sort of have a funder in a sort of quiet, confidential conversation with a interview with the consultant, sort of say, I think they ought to do this. And then the consultant doesn't actually tell you who said that. And then you try to figure out what to do with that. Well, who said it? Does it have merit? Does it not have merit? But if you hear it real time, there's dialogue that can happen around it. And it really, we got a lot of encouragement to expand our service area. We got a lot of encouragement to expand our activity with our land trust work. And from, you know, the State Housing Finance Agency, for example, I did not expect them to suggest such things. Lots of encouragement from county folks that were outside of Duluth saying that they wanted more of that work to happen in that space. And then I'll just put all these up again. So we didn't do any of the confidential interviews this time around. We did input sessions just with our staff. We didn't do one just with the board until we had gathered all the broad information. We had the board members sort of present with other people while they were providing input, which was sort of an interesting way for them to see what others think about us and hear and actually have dialogue around that as well. And then, so ultimately that culminated in a process where we did an environmental scan based on all of that input, kicked that around with management team, brought it to the board with the report of all the things that came out of the sessions. And what we ended up doing was the bottom, the input session, where we synthesized all of this work and chewed on it with the board and decided what we wanted. In the past, we've done a combination of the top two, where it was just staff synthesizing what we heard from the consultant who talked to all the people, and then either at the director team level or at a team made up of staff throughout the whole organization that wanted to be part of the process, chewed on it and brought some recommendations to the board. So it was a very different process all the way through, but much more dialogue, I would say, is the thing that really was useful. Lots of ability to clarify what someone actually meant when they provided the input instead of just getting it.
How many staff do you have?
Yeah, we're about 29 staff, and then if you add the construction company, another 5 crew people. So. I brought some copies of the strategic plan. They're up here, and also our annual report. You can grab one of those if you want on the way out. The plan that's represented here, in my belief, has a lot more ambition in it and a lot more commitment to justice and working with moving the needle on the homeownership gap, racial homeownership gap, than I think might have happened if we'd done our typical process. I'm proud of the way that we engaged with people, and I think we have a better plan. The other bit that I would share is that this document doesn't have the goals and sort of specific numerical pieces in it yet. We've built that out afterwards and are working on projects that then support those numerical goals. So this is kind of painting with a big brush, what you see here, but it really, it made a difference for us in a lot of ways in terms of having a stronger plan. I'm not saying this exactly as well as I might like to, but suffice to say, what we're working on now is we're finishing up the first wave of projects that support sort of doing more in all the areas where we had goals to increase, and those were productivity of number of housing units in large measure, and on the homeownership gap, racial homeownership gap, and so we then identified projects that, you know, if we're going to do twice as many land trust homes, what are the things we need to know and have in hand to be able to actually make that jump. If we're gonna help 3 times as many folks of color buy a house, how is that going to happen? What do we need to have? And so it's driven community engagement with us in terms of reaching out to allies to help build a broader base of group of support to go to funders to increase the down payment assistance, because that's the tool we think can really drive that. And it also really drove the creation of the credit builder and repair program. So I'll move on at present, but happy to talk more about that later if you have questions. Getting ahead of myself. The other thing that I forgot to mention is there were, I would say, 4 or 5 sort of champions that surfaced as a result of the external champions that surfaced as a result of this broad process. So people that in their positions working external to our organization, I can count on in ways that we couldn't count on them before. They understand our work more deeply than they understood it before being part of the process. And they understand sort of like, one example is the person that runs the housing program at the city of Duluth. She was friendly before this, but like her understanding of how come we needed to have sites identified that were buildable 18 months in advance of putting a shovel in the ground went up immeasurably. And so when we applied last summer for state funding, this past summer, we had far more sites in pipeline because that person understood our book of work differently than they would have been able to understand it otherwise. And there's something about sort of being in the room, hearing from folks that we've helped, hearing from board members, hearing from other partners, that sort of opens eyes of folks in a different way. And so it was really more of a community organizing process in some way. And then the other bit really that stuck out for me, in addition to the relational things, is that we did embed the diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice goals in the plan in a way we had not done before. And it sort of makes us put our money where our mouth is. And I'm scared about finishing the strategic plan in terms of getting all the work done. And I think that's appropriate. Like we have a lot of work to be doing in our communities. And so we should be a little nervous on whether we can deliver on that. And we should feel some urgency to get going because there are a lot of people that don't have the housing they need, right? We did a separate staff session where staff could put all of the things out there. And then we were a bit more selective on which staff we had be part of the mix process. And I was probably more nervous than I needed to be about that, but that can be a thing for sure. We did bring in a consultant, worked with Portage Partners out of Minneapolis, actually. So yeah, I don't know that I would have had the guts to do such a broad process without that. We did a fair bit of dancing and negotiating, and I got to say, like that part of the plan and the process was really great. Moving on to some business planning things. For me, I should have given one more disclaimer when I was doing the one at the beginning where I'm not an organizational development consultant. I'm neither an accountant or finance person. So my language when I talk about such things I use words like widgets. But for us, I think what's been really important for us to be able to be sustaining with the land trust piece of our program is what is the product that we produce? What do we bring into the community, to the people that we serve? How do we define that, and how do we compensate ourselves for that? It's kind of simplistic, but I think I've seen groups that tackled a project that got them so off their line that they didn't keep an engine of things going that allowed them to maintain revenue and growth and keep moving forward. In our second story of woe that I'll talk about later, that played a part in it, for sure. There's this notion of vertical integration that I think has been beneficial for us. I was poking around online, and the definition that I found that I liked of vertical integration was when a juice company buys an orchard. So you're capturing sort of the supply chain in that, and we've done that with our general contracting on the AC rehab, and we've done it with our Realty LLC. We'll talk about that in a bit. And then if you're going to do X homes a year, and you're going to take these parts of the process, how much staffing do you need to make that happen? How much operating capital do you need to support that staffing until the revenue's coming in from the activity that you're doing? When we were doing the buyer initiated program, we needed to raise a lot more operating funds because developers' fees were much less and we weren't getting realtor commissions. So we had to raise more operating money to do that than we have to for the AC rehab program, assuming we're selling the homes that we do with the AC rehab program. And then development capital, a limiting piece for us really has been how much gap money can we get to lower the price of the homes that we need to sell to people. So again, that's part of the reason I'm sweating about the strategic plan that we approved last year is how are we actually going to double CLT production? So it's been a limiting factor to us in large measure because our local municipalities that we get funding to leverage the state with only have so much money. And yeah.
Yes, so you guys, been doing grants and other donations or just what?
Yeah, well, on the operating side?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a mix, and what you'll see in a bit when we get going further is that the CLT program largely sustains itself without grant funds. That was not so true in the early days, but it's working pretty well after 23 years of tinkering. So, and then operating reserves and cash to support the development capital. And what I mean by that is if you don't have a strong enough balance sheet to have the interim financing that you need to keep a development pipeline going, if you don't have enough money in the bank, no one will lend to you. Gosh, isn't that crazy? You have to have money so people will lend it to you. It's just a wild concept to someone who didn't go to accounting school, but it's absolutely the truth. And again, when we get to the stories of woe, that was one of the things that tightened us is when we were stretched out with debt. All of a sudden, that was affecting other lines of business that we needed lending to borrow dollars for. So kind of our one roof style, how we've done business planning, I call it the little red hen strategy. And essentially what happened when I started 25 years ago was we could find almost no contractors that wanted to build a land trust house. We tried to work with realtors, and that was a real challenge in our community to get them to understand things on the front end. And so ultimately we started doing as much of the things ourselves as we could. That may or may not have been the smartest strategy. And again, I'm not suggesting everybody do what we did, but this is what we ended up trying that worked and how we got to where we are today. So most of our real estate land trust development has happened in infill ways. Even the new houses have been more infill lots than subdivisions. For a long time, 4 houses in one space was the most we'd done. And that has really worked for us. We've played the neighborhood revitalization card really well when affordable housing wasn't the word of the day, the flavor of the day. We were building homes that were nicer than the other homes in the neighborhood and building alliances with neighbors in the city because of that. Our realty arm has been a really important piece of how we funded our show and also how we've gotten folks in homes. So after we sold some houses on our own, there's a limited broker program in Minnesota. I don't remember the exact details of it, but once you've sold so many homes over so many years, you're able to have a full broker's license. So Jim Philbin is a broker for us and works. We pay a full commission even during the recession and the housing crisis time. We were paying full commissions, and that meant that we gained popularity with realtors because not everyone was paying full commissions during that time. And then common ground construction, it took a while for us to get that working and be more than a kind of break-even venture. But the last 5 years, it's contributed substantially to the bottom line for the organization. And they primarily do for us our ACK rehab homes, and then they do a bit of private market work as well. They used to do new construction, but we've not been focusing on that lately, which is part of the reason we've been profitable. We do listing, we represent buyers sometimes, and we're also involved in the transactions when we buy homes. So if there's a realtor involved in the purchase of a home, we'll take a commission on that too. If any of you have worked with Jim or been around him, he's the softest salesperson you'll ever meet in your life. So I think that's really important that you're not sort of pushy about representing buyers if they're interested in working with you. I think it makes perfect sense. You're going to work with them anyway. Oftentimes what we found is that the realtor that was involved really didn't do much, and so kind of hold your nose and pay the commission. So it's nice to feel like you're not wasting that commission on someone else who's not really doing it. Quick story: we were doing the buyer initiated program, and a realtor that was representing a buyer had an accident and couldn't finish the transaction after the purchase agreement was signed. Her husband was a realtor. He stepped in and did the transaction. He actually was part of a neighborhood group that had not been friendly to us prior, so that was a fun closing. But after the closing, he asked if I could get him a copy of the lease, and we gave him a copy. And a week later, he came in and he sat down with Jim and me, and he had 20 questions, and we answered all but 2 of the questions that we needed to sort of check a little bit with legal counsel. I mean, he really was asking deep questions. And even before we answered the last 2 questions, he said, I'm convinced this is a good thing for a bunch of people that I'm serving that wouldn't otherwise be able to buy a house. I'm going to start bringing you people. And I'll bet he represented half to 2/3 of the folks that came the next 5 years. And he played piano at our annual meeting every year. Yeah, when we did it, we had grant funds to lower the price of the home, largely came from Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. And then we used local dollars for the renovation work. And again, the reason we stopped doing it was we could only get about $20,000 per house locally. And when those scopes of work started to need to be bigger than that, it was really awkward to say no to buyers when they pick a house out that they thought was fine. My understanding is that the purchase agreement represents the full price of the house, all the value, and then when we were doing, and then there's an affordability gap that brings it down, and that comes in the form of whatever funds we've been able to raise for the house. So there's kind of 2 numbers in there. One is the full value, and I think it's the leasehold value, so it's diminished a little bit. So if the lot was, say, $20,000 in value, it might be $15,000. So the total value is 160 fee simple. It might be 150 leasehold.
How does that work for funders that require multiple bids? Are they just bidding out the trades, or?
We have to bid everything but carpentry. Anything we self-perform, we don't have to bid, but the rest of it we do. And that's part of the reason the new construction doesn't work as well, is because a general contractor can just bring a bid for the whole deal. And we have to bid every damn screw that goes in the drywall. So, yeah. For many years, we didn't focus. I should just say I didn't stomp my foot and say, damn it, construction company, you're going to hold the line. And if something costs what it costs, we're going to pay it. And Jim raised the price of the house. We opted to sort of fall on the knife with our construction company in order to keep the houses as low in price as we initially planned. And that's a short story to it, really. It just takes a lot of discipline to sort of take your piece at every part of the supply chain that you're in. And if you don't do that, you have a construction company that just breaks even or maybe loses a little money some years. So this is shows you our 23 revenues. So on top, there's a little bit of money from LISC. Anybody here associated formally with LISC? Okay, we can talk. Lisk likes to count every damn thing we do at One Roof, and so I put a little bit of their operating money toward our land trust work, even though we could get by without it, because if they're going to count the production, we're gonna put a little bit of funding there. But it's a complicated relationship. Anyway, you can see we have Act Rehab developers fees is a big piece of it. New construction developer fees, and then the the real estate commissions are not a small amount of the whole schmear, and I think lease fees also are important to contemplate. $131,000 pays for a whole lot of stewardship work, we have a lease where we can bump the price of the lease $12 a year or $1 per month per year, and so we've done that. We didn't do it a couple of years during the pandemic, just more of a symbolic thing. I don't know that those $12 actually helped families terribly much, but it seemed like the right thing to do. But if we hadn't done that, it'd be our lease fee started at $25. Now it's at $35. So multiply that times 300 homes, and that's it's a significant difference. So I really encourage folks to think about it that way as you're setting a lease payment, because if you're going to really be providing stewardship services and that's the source of revenue for it, it's okay to charge for that, and it's okay to think over time about how it needs to go up. The way that we've handled the resale realty commissions has been typically if there's room to put the commission to pay for that with the affordability that's in the house, then we don't have the seller pay the commission. If someone lives in the house for a year and there's not been much change in value, they're going to end up paying that commission. But if they've lived in the house for 10 years and there's a bit of cushion, then we slide that into the affordability component. And the analysis we do is, can a similar or less wealthy buyer, based on area median income percentages, buy the house at resale than when it was selling at the first time? Our lending operation is far more philanthropic than we might ideally have it. Home buyer and counseling is a very traditional nonprofit sort of activity, so you've got to raise money. Much of that comes from the state through the Home Ownership Center, some from HUD. The tenant landlord work comes from grants from the Duluth Housing Authority and St. Louis County and the city of Duluth, and that's actually probably a little story I should tell. So when we started that program, we were reviving a program that another organization ran and stopped doing, and there was with an old housing stock, it's super important that advocacy for both tenants and actually landlords existed, because the way we operate that program is we say we come from the middle, and so if tenants don't understand what their responsibilities are, they're going to lose their rights. So it doesn't do us any good to just advocate for their rights, so we really try to do education broadly with it. And the classic thing that foundations in our neck of the woods like to do is to start things, but they don't want to pay for them long term. And so we just said, this needs to happen, but if someone isn't going to pay for it long term, we're not going to start it, because it's going to siphon funding from our other programs. And so it was a bit of a chess game where we just stared them down until they were willing to pay. And it was the part of the reason that worked is it was a pretty broad community effort to get the program back. And so it's one thing for the county commissioners to tell me they're not going to fund the program, but when they're telling 6 other groups and 5 folks that have been homeless, it's different. So the question was, what does Brooke do? Yeah, Brooke is here. If you get a chance to talk to her, you should. She's amazing. Not in the room, but she's here. You might see her with the little baby. So she's like 3rd week back from maternity leave. So, but Brooke does proactive engagement of our land trust homeowners. So we do events 2-3 times a year for anybody and everybody that wants to show. She fields calls, just might be about something with the house, it might be about property taxes. We also do some proactive kind of projects. So we might have a work crew come in from out of town that does projects at 3 land trust homes where folks don't have as much capacity in the household to do a landscaping project or something. And then she works through really tough stuff. If someone's getting foreclosed on, sort of helps them understand what's happening in that space and what resources are out there and how to ride through it, whatever their path ends up being. So all the land trust properties are home ownership, except for 2 have rental apartments in them. They're duplexes, but that's just a program for the general public of the city. We've done some interesting things, I think, as an organization for a long time, and then more recently as well, that I think are contributing to some really great hiring that we've done during the pandemic. Which, if you are a manager geek and looking at articles in newspapers, that has not been true for a lot of places. Hiring in the pandemic has been really hard. So one of the pieces is we have a 32-hour work week. When I had first started, one of the things the board asked was what could we do besides pay that would help you stick around here? This is working. We'd like to keep you. And I had very young kids, and I said if I could have the ability to stay home on Fridays and be with my kids, that would be fantastic. And so it was made so, and then we hired somebody else, and how do you tell them they have to work 40? And then you hire somebody else, and how do you tell them they have to work 40? And so it just kind of became the norm. And I would say that now it's probably true that if you're not at director level staff, very few of our staff work more than 36 hours a week, and most of the time they only work 32, 33. And they're in charge of their schedule. Except for the front desk person who needs to be there to direct traffic, answer the phone, that sort of thing. We don't care when people come in. And I would say director staff typically average 40 hours a week, maybe a bit more. It's been a marvelous recruiting tool. We've pulled in some folks during the pandemic that I don't think we would have been able to hire pre-pandemic. They were looking for quality of life things. They were looking to be able to, have more autonomy with their days. And I think it's a big experiment in terms of what happens after as things sort of settle out. But we've also got a hybrid work situation that we're still sort of like feeling our way through. But at this point in time, except for the front desk position, folks are kind of in charge of when they're in the office and when they're not in the office. And I think that's working really well for us as well. I've been part of some rooms of people this big at NeighborWorks functions and heard the way that folks talk about their staff and worrying about whether they're actually working if they're at home and not being willing to give them such autonomy. And I find it kind of offensive, for one, and I think I'm glad I don't work there, for 2. And I really think that is making a difference for us at present and the folks we've been able to attract to come to work for us. So I'm quietly sort of talking about that because I believe it's the new normal. I think is going to be how flexible can employers be and still have a culture that the mission that we do and the enterprise that we do is important, and folks need to really work at it. And it isn't that we're lax. We work really hard, but we're focused and we work when it makes sense for our lives to be working. So anyway, I think that's helping with retention. The other thing that I would want to mention just historically is we've promoted folks a lot. So Jim Philbin came to work for us as an AmeriCorps Vista. It was amazing, godsend. Jackie Kemp, who is in charge of our homebuyer education, our tenant landlord connection, and the lending arms, came as an AmeriCorps Vista. And they've moved up to assume more and more responsibility, and they're ridiculously professional staff who are great managers. And that's the culture that we have. Not everybody is a move up person. Some folks like to stay where they're at, and some folks have lower ceilings than others. But it has worked really, really well for us to be able to promote folks that have more capacity than the jobs that they're in. The other thing is we've fired folks over the years, and someone on our team presently has done a bunch of managing in a different job that he had, and one of the things that he said is, I've never, after firing somebody, I've never felt like, well, I should have waited and done that later. And almost every time they think that was the right thing, and probably I should have done it sooner. It might sound really harsh, and I am a total softie. I need to sort of be talking to folks to buck myself up to say that, yep, we got to draw a line on this. It doesn't come supernaturally to me, but I think it is actually true that if someone's in a job that they're not doing well, you're not doing them any favors by having them stay. It also contributes to bad culture. If someone on the team isn't pulling their weight and you don't do something about that, then other folks aren't going to want to stick around either. And so we don't talk about that much when we're talking about capacity and sustainability of organizations, but I think it's true. It's important. So on the fundraising side, kind of curious what other folks are doing. I've already showed you ours. So we're in the earned income camp primarily. It didn't happen overnight. We grew to that. I would say at the time that we did the merger, we were about 70% of our budget was coming from earned income, and it's gotten a bit better subsequent to then. But I'm guessing most folks are getting operating grants to support what they're doing with their land trust program. I wanted to talk a little bit about capacity building grants. We've used those to good effect to sort of increase our earned income. It's important to not overpromise, but we've, gotten a capacity building grant to sort of do the real estate work. We've gotten a capacity building grant to add the stewardship component, and saying we're going to need this for a couple of years, but then we'll be able to pay for it. So it's a strategy that I've found really works with foundations. And if anything, I've been overambitious in how soon we could make good on paying for it ourselves. I probably would say I should have stretched those out a few more years, but it's resulted in a lot of dollars coming in to pay for operations that wouldn't have come otherwise if they didn't see that we had a plan to sort of pay for it a different way later. Corporate grants, are folks getting those? I'm curious. A little bit here and there. We get a few corporate grants, but we do better with corporate sponsorships. So we do at present, we're doing our annual meeting is a pretty big event. We try to pack a room and we get corporations to sponsor it. We used to charge ticket prices for a fundraiser. We make more money when we don't charge the people that come to the event and charge corporations to pay for the event. So that's what we found sort of works. I'm curious about donations. We're in the probably 100 to 125,000 a year in contributions for donations. We're not working that angle hard. We send out an appeal letter every fall. There's an envelope when we send our annual report out in the spring, and most of that just kind of comes. I have not taken time to schmooze with donors much, so most of those are coming in $100 to $500 checks. We have a few folks that have commas in their donations, but very few that have five figures. It's mostly 1,000 to 5,000. I think we have a state tax credit that's just coming online next year that those funds have to go to development, but I think there's a potential donor component. The compensation is based on full-time employment, and we do a study at least every other year. We get data from NeighborWorks, we get data from the Council of Nonprofits in Minnesota, and we get data from DEED, the Department of Employment and Economic Development, and we sort of, the best we can, sort of synthesize what comparable positions are and try to set wages in that space. I will be totally honest and say that it's tough to hit finance, especially high-level finance positions, comparable wages, but we're pretty committed to that, and we're planning to bump pay next year commensurate with really glad you asked the question, Jake, commensurate with inflation. And then the other thing that we've done is we have an incentive pay situation where part of our employee handbook, if we hit our production goals, budget goals for the year, we'll pay out 4% of wages. We budget to do it, so we'll pay out 4% of wages as incentive pay by the end of the first quarter of the next year. And some years back, we made the decision that that was going to be paid equally across the board to folks. So, I'm the highest paid staff person. Otherwise, I'd get the biggest incentive payout. That payout doesn't make the difference for me that it does to my front desk person in terms of our household's reality, right? So I get the same bonus as the lowest paid staff person does. And that I think people have really appreciated as well. Our benefits package is good. I would like the health insurance to be better, but we're small, so we have a hard time getting a really fantastic plan for folks. But I think it's fair given all the things. We also do 5% toward retirement, and if the individual contributes up to 2%, we match that. 32 hours is full time. So if you do that, you get the whole thing. If it's less than that, some of the things are prorated. I should say I started in 1998, so this one wasn't me, but I'll fully own the next one. So we started with a lot of good intentions, a lot of grassroots resolve. We had a real dedicated group of board members. If you look at who that group is, today, those individuals have done some really great things in Duluth and surrounding communities. So it wasn't like it was a bunch of knuckleheads, but they didn't have experience in the housing development space. And we got over our skis on some projects and tried to do too hard of projects without enough funding, without enough expertise, and had some things go badly. One of those things was we sold a house to a family that really wasn't ready to be a homeowner. The house was not in fantastic shape, and that just burned up. Not literally, but it not actually, I should say. But it was not a good situation. We also made the mistake of selling a house to a daughter of a city councilor on a contract for deed, and the time the house was sold, the daughter was not in good relations with her mom, and they mended things, and then her mom paid for an attorney to sue us for the land. That wasn't a lot of fun. That resolved itself shortly before I started, but the short of it, those days, I think the short story of it was really just we didn't have the capacity and the expertise to be doing what we were trying to do. And it's really important to invest in that know-how and that capacity, and to make sure that you're looking around and getting really good guidance to do the things that you do. There's lots of consultants out there that can help with things. Grounded Solutions can help you connect to those people. But yeah, I just think it's important we talk about the things that weren't easy or good, and encourage our colleagues to sort of seek help so that we don't repeat more of those mistakes. I think in Minnesota we're over the hump that if a couple of us tank, the rest of us will be okay. Is that fair, Brenda? Yeah. But for a bunch of years I was really nervous, and we had some groups go away, and it caused us significant challenges with the State Housing Finance Agency, because if you're asking them for $1 million to do this book of work, and the group in the next city is going out of business, and there's 8 land trust homeowners that don't know what's going to happen, that's not a good sign. So anyway, that was one of our stories of hard times. The next one was actually 2018 and 19, and this was when we started were a couple of things that went on. One was we were doing a subdivision of mixed income housing in Duluth and misgauged the price of the market rate homes. And if we'd have done this project 3 years later, it would have been fine, but we didn't do it 3 years later. And we lost our pants on that piece of that project. And concurrently with that, we were stretching to do a 10-house new construction project in Grand Marais. And there were all manner of things up there that we didn't anticipate. Not least among them were the fact that engineering drawings that showed water lines being in one place were really wrong. And those lines were, 30 feet the other direction, and there was bedrock between here and there. It's just kind of the Wild West. Really hard to get subcontractors up there to work on projects. And concurrent with that, we were also stretching to do a 16-unit project in Lutzen, also hour and a half from the home office up the North Shore. The modular company that we had contracted with to buy homes from had a change in leadership at the plant, had a 20-year person retire for that change in leadership to happen, had a huge FEMA order come in right before our project. And we were leaking in many, many different ways. And so we had to do a bit of restructuring in late 2018, and I spent most of 2019 going to partners and asking for cash to help us recapitalize, so we had the kind of operating money on hand that we needed to keep going and doing what we're doing. It was one of the more humbling and heartening things that I've had to do in the 25 years that I've been on the job, but I think it's really important that I don't pretend that never happened. And it's really important that folks know that if you're stacking several new things on top of one another, you're putting yourself in a risky spot. And we shouldn't have been the general contractor for that work up the North Shore, either of those projects. That was too big of a haul for our little construction company to tackle. And then some of it was just plain straight up bad luck, to be honest. And that happens too. But so we raised $500,000 to sort of turn the ship around and keep going. But it was, that was my second midlife crisis. Anyway, it's good, makes for stories. But so minimizing risk. Then I wanted to talk about a bit. We could have handled those projects differently up the shore had we held our ground and not pretended we could do all the things. We would have been able to not take the beatings that we took when something didn't go as we had planned for it to go. So the project in Grand Rapids, which is an hour and a half from town, that we're working on presently, the Itasca County HRA is taking the risk of being the developer on that project. We're not trying to figure out what it's like to build houses in that town at this point in time. We're getting a small fee for bringing the land trust model, bringing technical assistance, for helping them with the grant writing, and for stewarding the units on the back end. But they're taking the bulk of the risk with that one. Other ways that can happen are insisting that, I think, if a municipality really wants more land trust homes there, they could help take some of the risk by helping buy and sit on homes or buy and sit on land, so that you don't have those holding costs eating you up if you don't manage to move forward as fast as you might with the development. I'm curious if anyone else is employing partnerships that are sort of helping you minimize risk. Is there anything? I know Habitat and many of the land trusts are working together. I'm assuming that minimizing risk is part of that. Is that another example? This isn't land in the land trust realm so much, but we're applying for funding to do a redevelopment of a rural development 24-unit rental project in Grand Marais, and they were pretty desperate for someone to step up and do that. So we got the housing authority there to pay for the pre-development expenses to get us to an application to the tune of about $75,000, and to kick in some more for maintenance of the property if we had to take ownership sooner. and to give us $30,000 to work on the staffing of that, because we hadn't planned on doing it last year. And it's a way for us to sort of take a run at a project without having to take all the upfront risk. And I plan to use that more in the future. Yeah. Hats off to Twin Cities Habitat. Honestly, like the way that they're working with land trusts in the metro area here in Minnesota is phenomenal. And I think it's rare. Like there's a handful of stories of when it wasn't like that in other communities where it was pretty ugly. So I'm grateful because it makes a lot more land trust things happen here than would otherwise. Oh, yeah, municipalities, housing authorities, economic development authorities, other nonprofit developers. We've teamed up with several on multifamily projects back there, yeah. One of the things we did after the 2018 debacle for us is we started a project review committee. It's a committee of our board, meets monthly. It goes over, they don't poke their nose much into the AC rehab work because that was never problematic for us. I think if we had a change in staffing in that space, we'd probably bring projects to them for a time. But they definitely are involved in the single family new construction. If we're doing, in particular, a new design, a new neighborhood, we bring a proposal to them for what the total cost is going to be, what the price point will be for the sale. We're getting an external valuation estimate from a realtor to make sure we're in the ballpark on the price-wise things. If it's a multifamily project, it's a much more sophisticated analysis of the whole pro forma. But that was something that we were doing a little bit of with our board, but it was not to the extent that this is. And that group functions, as a check and balance to what we're trying to do on the staff level. It also is a think tank where we can test out new ideas. And yeah, I highly recommend it. It's kind of nice to have that conversation outside the boardroom. We've used our committees to bring more people onto the board, like as a way to have them start volunteering with the organization too. It's working so far. This is the big lesson for me, under promise and over deliver. It's a good mantra. So I tend to have a lot of optimism. That's why I think I've been able to be in the business so darn long. But it's just really important to not base your budgets and your plans on the best case scenario. Knock that back 25, 30% and see what you can pay for in that space. Similarly, contingencies and fat in your budget, just so that, if one thing goes wrong, you're not laying off staff. Charitable lines of credit are hard to get, but you can find them if you build the right case. I think increasingly foundations are trying to make a little bit of money with their portfolio of investments. That's making a difference in the community. We're having conversations with three foundations in our area for that. And then we budget to grow our reserve every year. And that's just been, again, that's how you can get that line of credit, is if you've got some money in the bank already. Well, thank you for the time. There's a survey to fill out in your packet, as Jeff Washburn talked about. It's the QR scan. So, and I appreciate the time and the work that you all do, and in particular, taking time to come here and be part of this sort of learning to try to do the work better. So thanks for all of that. Yeah.